Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining today. We are excited to have you here with us for our webinar on ChatGPT with Niki Black. My name is Robin and I'm on the CASEpeer marketing team. While we wait for attendees to jump on, I'd love to hear where everyone is joining us from. I am located in sunny Southern California. You can go ahead and drop your location in the chat on your screen. Before we get started with this very insightful webinar, I just wanted to run through a couple of housekeeping items to ensure everything runs smoothly and questions are answered. To start, we love your questions. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation in the question field at the bottom right of your screen. This will be the best place for us to track questions and make sure we don't miss anything. We will have time at the end of the presentation to run through these questions. So just know if you ask a question during the presentation, we'll hold it to answer at the end. Additionally, we will be asking a couple of poll questions throughout the presentation. And we would love to hear your feedback, so please keep an eye out for those. With that said, I would like to introduce you to our speaker today, Niki Black. Niki is well known in the legal space and wears many hats as an attorney, author, and also the Senior Director of Education at Affinipay, which is CASEpeer's parent company. Niki is very well versed on technology in the legal space, and I'm excited for you all to hear from her today. So I will now turn it over to Niki.
Thanks so much, and I'm looking forward to talking to all of you today about unleashing ChatGPT in your practice. And I'm going to focus specifically on litigation, given the audience that I've got here, and I'm going to talk to you about sort of a broad overview of generative AI and how we got here. And then we're going to talk about the specific concepts, definitions of AI and ChatGPT, talk about ethics issues, bias issues, and a number of other issues to think about. And then some of the practical ways that you can use generative AI tools now that are public, consumer-based generative AI tools like ChatGPT within the bounds of ethics. That will avoid you having to input any confidential information given the state of the product at this time, but still get a lot of value out of the technology. Now, before I do that, I do want to just briefly introduce myself and let you know about my background. I'm an attorney. I practiced law for a decade here in Rochester, New York. And in a number of contexts, I started out in the public defender's office, and then I was a civil litigator with a law firm for a number of years. I've also been of counsel to a DWI defense firm. So my background probably overlaps with many of you, the practices that many of you have here today. So translating this technology into your practice areas is not going to be a leap for me. And so I'm looking forward to talking to you about using this technology in the context of litigation and give you some ideas of ways that you can use it that will be really valuable for you. And one of the overarching things I'm going to be talking about is that right now we have these consumer-based technologies, but soon, actually it's already happened, you're going to have legal-specific tools. Soon all the software that you use that's legal-specific is going to have this embedded in it because it's moving so quickly. It's probably going to happen a lot more quickly than you might think. So I'm going to be touching on that a bunch of times today too. And soon these confidentiality issues probably will not be as much of an issue. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about this. That's a big part of what I do with Affinipay. I started with my case 11 years ago, and we were acquired by Affinipay, which is LawPay's parent company in 2022, last year. And we had acquired CASEpeer before we were acquired by Affinipay. So I'm really excited to be talking to all of you on behalf of CASEpeer. And a lot of what I do for the company is externally, I educate lawyers about the intersection of law and technology. I write ABA journal columns on specific types of software, including a bunch of the generative AI tools that have come out. So that would be a good resource for you if you want to learn about generative AI tools that are specific to legal, or even legal billing software tools, or document management tools, or all different types of categories. I write about those in that column. I also write for Above the Law, and I also write for the Daily Record. Those are all legal tech columns, and those are all different places where you can find my content. And I've co-authored 2 books. I wrote Social Media for Lawyers with my co-author Carolyn Elephant in 2010, and then Cloud Computing for Lawyers in 2012, and that was one that I authored on my own. So the intersection of law and tech has been near and dear to my heart. I love writing about it and talking to lawyers about it, and that's what we're going to do today. So let's dive into artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. First, let's define the concepts and make sure that you're sort of grounded in what this technology is. So artificial intelligence is a constellation of technologies that gives a computer system the ability to solve problems and perform tasks that would otherwise require human intelligence. And the context that I like to put this in is motor vehicles, to sort of give you a sense of what AI is compared to basic machine learning or natural language processing, which is the natural language processing is kind of how you had all this functionality baked into the legal research tools that you use before generative AI came along, that would provide some additional context and help you get additional information that's useful to you while you're conducting that legal research. So that's sort of the stage before generative AI came. So in the context of motor vehicles, first you have, the old school just car, right? Like a motor vehicle that you get in and you drive, and that's it. Like you have to drive, you keep it at the speed that you want to keep it at, you avoid any accidents. You have to do all of that yourself as the driver of the vehicle. And then we had cruise control that came along, and cruise control controlled the speed of the vehicle when you wanted to turn cruise control on, but that's all it did. And you would still have to brake to slow it down or turn off cruise control. Then we end up with dynamic cruise control. I don't know if any of you have access to that, but essentially what dynamic cruise control does is it not only keeps your car at one speed, but it will slow it down while it's on to avoid colliding with cars in front of you. It oftentimes includes features, both the cruise control aspect itself and just safety features in your car that will let you know if you're going out of your lane. And it helps you avoid accidents and drive more safely in that respect. So that's a situation where the car does slow down so that you can avoid an accident at its own behest, if you will, when you have that activated. But you still have to take those steps to avoid the accident, right? So that's kind of where our research was before generative AI, really. And that's the way that our technology was. But then you have autonomous vehicles. And that really is the next stage of AI, just like generative AI is the next stage of a different category of AI. With autonomous vehicles, these cars drive themselves. Most laws require a human to be in the car to make decisions to avoid accidents, but these cars can actually avoid the accidents themselves, and they can drive autonomously, hence the name. But the algorithmic programming of these cars does have some issues, which is why they require humans in the car. And so some of you may recall a lawsuit, a horrible accident that resulted in a lawsuit from a couple of years ago, where when these cars were just released in California, one of them ran into a pedestrian who was pushing a bicycle and killed her. And they ultimately realized that one of the root causes of that accident was A, the driver didn't jump in and avoid her, as they should have, the human driver, but B, the vehicle and its underlying algorithms, the programming told it to only recognize humans in a crosswalk, and also the bicycle confused it even further. And in a few minutes, I'm going to show you a short video clip that kind of exemplifies that and also shows you how AI still has some work to do. So that's sort of the context of so to give you a sense of what generative AI is. We've reached this tipping point with artificial intelligence technology and generative AI, where you have these various technologies coming together all at once. And that's what has gotten us to this point where there's such rapid advancement in such a short amount of time. And it's similar to what happened with cloud computing or mobile computing. You can't have mobile computing until you had cloud computing, where a lot of the processing and storage could occur off your phones. And then you had technology that was advanced enough so that your battery could be small enough so that you could have some processing on that phone. But ultimately but for the cloud advancement, you really wouldn't have had this computer in your hand as early as we did in 2007. In that case, these different technologies came together to make mobile computing truly viable. And you've got that same thing going on with artificial intelligence. These different technologies kind of came to fruition, matured at the same time at the right level to enable this tech advancement that we're seeing. And these are just descriptions of some of those different technologies to give you a sense of the things that are involved that kind of help push this artificial intelligence technology into this next stage that allows us to have generative AI in a way that's truly functional and impactful for us. So first, before I dive in and talk about generative AI, which is a subsection of AI, let's do a quick poll so that I can get a sense of how many of you are actually have dipped your toes into the generative AI pool, if you will. And then from there, we'll start talking about it and do a little bit more of a deep dive. Okay, so I'm going to assume you've all had a chance to vote, and I'm going to move on to the next slide. So let's talk about ChatGPT. ChatGPT is a subset of artificial intelligence. And really what I'm talking about here is generative AI. ChatGPT is a brand. That's the name of a particular brand's generative AI. So generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that creates new content. So you put in a query, a conversational query, and it creates output. That output can be text, which is what lawyers are going to use it most often for. And those are large language models. And I'll give you I'll show you a graphic in a minute that will show you where all these different models fall. Images, sometimes lawyers can use the images. It might be useful for, I would say like product liability claims, maybe to possibly help get an understanding of what the product could have looked like to prevent it. But I'm not sure the technology's come quite that far yet, but it's getting there real quickly. Music and other types of output. But large language models and text output are the primary ways that lawyers are going to be using it. And some examples of brands of this are ChatGPT, Bing Chat, and then there's Casetext Co-Counsel, which is a legal tool, and Copilot. So ChatGPT is probably the one you've heard the most about. ChatGPT just turned a year old at the end of November, on November 30th. ChatGPT 3.5 was released publicly on November 30th of last year. And then a few months later in February, it was upgraded to 4.0. And that's the truly most useful one. That's ChatGPT Plus. And that's the one that provides the most value in terms of the complexity of its output. Bing rolled it out into their tool. Google has one called Google Bard. And just today, they announced a significant update. And it's pretty impressive. So you might want to try Google Bard again if you haven't used it. And then in the legal space, Casetext rolled out Co-Counsel. Earlier this year, Co-Counsel is the first generative AI tool to be rolled out in the legal space. And they've been working with the folks at OpenAI, which is the company that owns ChatGPT, since last year. At the very least, they're one of the first 100 companies in the country, not just in legal tech, to work with OpenAI on this technology. And they rolled out Co-Counsel, which is a really viable use case of generative AI for lawyers that is handles most of those confidentiality issues and also a lot of the other issues you might be concerned about. And Thomson Reuters acquired them for $650 million a couple months back. And just last month, Thomson Reuters announced, and I was one of the journalists that was brought into New York City for this announcement, announced the rollout across multiple products, including their legal research tool. LexisNexis AI, they announced that the general rollout now out of beta across many of their products a couple of weeks before Thomson Reuters did. And Lexis has invested heavily in AI over the years, including the acquisition of Lex Machina for litigation analytics, which would be valuable for y'all as litigators. So you're seeing this get rolled out into the legal research tools that we all use most often. VLex is another company that acquired Fastcase, and they're also rolling this out. So you're absolutely seeing it rolled out by companies that understand your specific ethical needs and are taking significant steps to reduce hallucinations to almost nothing, completely address your confidentiality issues because they understand legal and they create these isolated environments for each firm. so that you don't have to worry about crossover or anything like that, and your output not being used to train the system, your input rather. So you're already seeing it rolled out in that way, and you're going to see it rolled out into most of the legal tech products your firm already uses within the next 6 months, I would predict. So what's going to happen is people are going to take the data that your firm has that's in their systems and use these tools in an isolated environment to make sense of your firm's data and make it easier for you to access information, make it easier for you to create documents, create case summaries, summarize depositions, trial transcripts. You're going to see fantastic use cases in these trusted legal technology environments. It's going to make this even more useful. But until that happens, you can use these tools ethically, and I'm going to talk to you about ways that you can do that today. This is just a chart that shows you where the LLMs are, which is the yellow, and then this overlap, and then you can see generative AI in the middle. So it just gives you a sense of the overall, the way that this sort of, where this fits in terms of all the different types of AI that's out there, and how that little sliver is where you see the generative AI tools that provide this output based upon conversational input. And just to give you a sense of how quickly this is moving, 100 million users, they obtained 100 million users in January 2023 after the launch of GPT 3.5 in November 2022. That gives you a sense of how quickly this is happening. Let me just show you the technology timeline, because I think what happens with lawyers is up until now, tech has advanced pretty quickly in the last decade, and it's hard to keep up if this isn't a significant interest of yours. And what's happening right now is we're at this exponential rate of expansion, and you're going to find that the tech's going to advance so quickly that if you aren't paying attention by attending seminars like this, you're going to be left behind. And this just gives you one sense of that, how quickly the tech is advancing. It shows you how long it took other technologies to reach 100 million users, and how quickly we are all of a sudden reaching that user base in such a short amount of time now. These are all the LLM developments since November across industries. And it just shows you how fast these tools have rolled out and how quickly things are changing. And it's not just you. If you're feeling overwhelmed, there's a reason for it. And then I do want to talk about all the different pitfalls of generative AI before I dive into the use cases, because those pitfalls are the things that are what hold lawyers back. These are the hurdles that prevent lawyers from using it. I know the things that keep you up at night. I practiced for a decade. You know, it's court deadlines and missed court deadlines. It's potential ethics violations brought by disciplinary committees. It's legal malpractice. And generative AI potentially triggers some of these pretty significantly. So that's why it's so important for the legal technology companies to solve these problems. And some have already done that to a large extent, so that you can use these tools and not worry about triggering some of these pitfalls. Before we dive into them, let's take one more poll and just get a sense of what your biggest concerns are when you use this tech. And then we will start talking about some of the pitfalls. And I just noticed the comment about the screen size, and I think it's partly related just to this platform. Some of my slides had some pretty small print that in other platforms or in real life on a big screen is not a problem, so I apologize for that, given the limitations of this particular platform. Let's talk about some of the pitfalls, and there are a number of them, right? First, there's ethics, right? So there's California just issued guidance 2 weeks ago. I wrote about it in my Above the Law column and in my most recent Daily Record column. So if you either go to Above the Law and search for my name, you'll see my columns. In the most recent column, I talk about it. And also on my personal blog, I republished my Daily Record article. but I think Above the Law is probably going to be the easiest way for you to find my write-up about it and a link to it. And they do provide some really useful guidance. And Florida has a proposed opinion that has not been finalized and issued as a formal opinion, but it's close to what it's going to end up being. That's available for public comment, which is also a good resource to look at. They're the first two to really issue some guidance, and they address a number of really interesting topics. I'll talk about California's in the context of the ethics section here, because it's the only one that's actually published. And it's the opinion itself. It's actually guidance that they published, not an opinion, which I think is the appropriate approach, because the ethics opinions that have already been published on technology and the ethics rules and their comments cover all these issues. They really do answer them in a way that you need. But what this guidance does is it provides you with ise cases and applications of these already existing rules and to these different situations. And it is a very thorough grid that they provide. They provide like a graph with a grid that has the different rules and then the different issues to think about and guidance in terms of applying this technology. And it covers a really broad base of different issues. Obviously, there's confidentiality. And right now, if you're going to use a public-facing, like consumer-based product like ChatGPT, Google Bard, Bing, Microsoft Bing, do not input any confidential information. I would suggest that even if you can turn off the training, which if you upgrade to ChatGPT Plus for $20, I think it's $19 a month, you have the option to check it, turn off the ability for them to use your data for training. I would suggest that in these public-facing ones, even if you can turn off that and say, no, don't use my data for training, I wouldn't trust it. I would avoid submitting any confidential information into these public-facing ones. I wouldn't worry about Thomson Reuters and Lexis. I would obviously first call them and ask them about it. Ask them all the questions, and the questions to ask. In the top of that slide, you'll see it's tinyurl.com/legal cloud questions. tinyurl.com/legal cloud questions. That's a shortened URL that will take you to a page on one of my blogs that lists the top 22 questions actually to ask cloud computing providers, pulled from my book that was published in 2012 by the ABA. And I've since updated that to add a list of questions to ask AI providers in the legal space. So that would be a good resource. And any AI provider that you use, you really should ask the full list of questions, because all AI tools are in the cloud. And so you want to ask them the AI questions and the cloud questions to understand the who, what, when, where, and why of how they handle your firm's data, because that is really one of the biggest issues is understanding how they handle it, who has access to it, the protections in place to keep it confidential, and also how do you get your data out of it should you need to, and in what format does it come out. There's a full list of questions that cover a lot of the ethical and security issues you need to think about. But this ethics opinion does a great job of dealing with the ethics one. So it talks about confidentiality and not inputting any confidential information in these public-facing products or any product until you understand how it's handled. It talks about tech competence. You need to understand the tech. You need to understand the basics of how it works and understand the output. You've got to review all output for accuracy. And I'll talk about that in 1 minute. Supervision, you need to make sure that everyone in your firm knows how to properly use it and that you've educated and trained them on that. There's some other interesting issues it talks about are pricing. That was one that I wasn't expecting them to weigh in on, but they did. And it was really interesting. What California said was that you cannot bill for the time saved using these tools. So if it would have taken you 20 minutes to draft a letter to your client or 20 minutes to prepare for trial with voir dire, and instead you use this tool and it took you 10 minutes instead. I'm clearly shortening the amount of time that it'll take you to prepare voir dire, but you can't charge for that time saved, but you can charge for the time that you spent using the tool, crafting the prompts, which is the input that you put into the tool to make sure that they're accurate, tweaking those prompts to get better results, just like you kind of would with legal research, right? You charge for the time you spend using the software, but they're saying that you cannot charge for the time that you saved. So if it would have taken you 4 hours to do something and it took an hour, you can't charge for 4 hours. And they also talk a little bit about charging a client for it, and also client consent and whether you need client consent and what that should look like. So there really are a ton of different issues to think about, and it's really good guidance. If you're not in California, it's not directly applicable, but it's still really helpful. And at this point, it's the only guidance issued. So it's a great thing to hang your hat on if you're in a different jurisdiction and you end up with an issue, but you follow the guidance in that opinion or in that chart. You also want to, accuracy is a big issue. I'm sure we've all heard of Schwartz, which is the guy in New York City, the lawyer who made headlines because he not only did he not read, he just submitted, he had it draft a memo for him and submitted it without even looking at the cases, without checking the sites, pulling the cases or anything. And the court's clerk noticed that they couldn't locate any of the cases. And there's a slide that follows this that has some headlines about that, but asked him about it. And he asked ChatGPT to provide cases, and ChatGPT not only took those fake case sites that it made up entire cases, which he then submitted to the court. Like he really doubled down instead of possibly using another resource to confirm that his information was accurate, given that the court was questioning it. And that's why he made those headlines. I would argue that is a competence issue. I don't think anyone should be submitting a memo to the court that was drafted by either another person or software without reading the memo, without pulling the cases and reading the cases and making sure that the cases cited stand for the proposition cited in the brief or memo. And that's basic competence. I would argue this really isn't an issue. It's tech competence. You understand that you need to review the output, and he didn't understand that. He failed to have tech competence and basic legal competence when he submitted it that way. But those are issues, and you need to make sure to review the output because it does a really good job of making things up and it sounds good. I try to think of ChatGPT. I have a subscription to the Plus as like a little person that sits on my shoulder, this assistant that is a fantastic assistant that just is a pathological liar every once in a while. And when I was talking to Jeff Pfeiffer, the head of product at LexisNexis at a conference recently, the way that he described this concept I thought was perfect. And he said that one of his customers said, my first-year associate at my firm hallucinates all the time. I review everything that person gives me because they don't know what they're doing. And you got to think of it as that, especially when you're using non-legal specific tools for legal output. You need to carefully review the output. And when you use the legal tools, you still got to review the output. That's basic competency. And another thing you need to be aware of is bias. I think this is I know this is a particular issue in the legal technology space. Oh, that's a very good question. What do I mean by hallucination? Fake output, lies. So an example that I'll give you is in the very beginning when this came out, and I won't name the company because this was literally within weeks of this functionality, this tool rolling out to everybody. They took ChatGPT and put a product in beta and was showing it to reporter in the legal technology space. The reporter wrote about it and took some screenshots, and it had asked it about a California ethics issue. And it wrote a really nice long memo about this issue. And in the middle of it, it cited like California ethics code. I don't know exactly what your ethics code is called. I'm in New York, but it cited, section 710 or 310. I can't remember the exact number, and said it stands for this proposition. And after this reporter published the post, a lawyer pointed out on, I think, Twitter, that is made up. There's no such thing as California Code of Ethics 310. Like, it sounds right, but it's not right. It made it up. So that's what hallucination means. It's when it will sometimes, especially the public-facing ones, make things up. And so in the case of this lawyer who told it to write a memo to submit to the court about a specific legal topic, it wrote a really good memo. The memo itself was well written and it was on point for the legal topics, but the case sites, like half of them were made up. They were not real cases, and the sites were not real sites. And when this guy doubled down and told ChatGPT to pull the cases and provide them to him because the court asked for it, it made up cases. And what it did was it took previously existing cases that stood for the exact opposite of what this lawyer wanted, and it wrote them in a way that the holdings changed, and it said what this guy wanted. There weren't actually whole cases out there that said what he wanted because it was not a great proposition to be hanging his hat on in this brief. But he didn't know that because he didn't read it. He didn't pull the cases. He just relied on the output of this software that is not legal software, that makes things up. So basically, a hallucination means a made up piece of information. Bias is another big issue, especially in the criminal justice space because of facial recognition technology. These tools, but even the output of these chatbots that we use, ChatGPT. If you ask it to tell you what what a lawyer looks like, or what a judge looks like, or what a paralegal looks like, for the lawyer, it's going to tell you a white guy. For the judge, it's going to tell you a white guy. For a paralegal, it usually picks a white woman. Like it defaults. It takes the stereotypes of our culture and it defaults and provides those as a default output oftentimes. And when you ask them to create images like DALL-E, which is now built into ChatGPT, it will default into these very stereotypical images if you don't otherwise tell it to create a diverse image. And even when you tell it to create a diverse image, oftentimes it'll throw like one person of color from a particular race in there, and that's it. So they are very biased. And in the criminal justice space, that's a big problem because the facial recognition technology, even before generative AI, defaulted to the white face and did a great job with white guys' faces. Everybody else, it really struggled with. And when you have top that off with grainy surveillance videos where you can't even really see the person's face very well, it did a great job at providing false identifications all the time, false matches. And there's a situation like the ACLU did a study and took sitting members of Congress a number of years ago and ran them against the system, Amazon's facial recognition tool, about 7 years ago. And it had mugshots as its data points to compare. And it identified like half of the members of Congress that were people of color as convicted criminals. Now, you may think some of what they say is criminal, but none of those people were convicted criminals, but the facial recognition technology said they were. So there's a lot of issues with bias that you really need to be aware of. And then the other issue is this technology is in its infancy. So it's brand new. It's getting better exponentially and at rates that we've never seen before. It's improving really rapidly. And these are the headlines I talked about the lawyer that used ChatGPT and made all these headlines because he submitted false case cites to the court. And then I want to show you this video. When I talk about it being in its infancy, this video shows you how that person was hit by a car. And also shows you how it sometimes just comes up with inaccurate information or matches faces falsely. This is a video of a Tesla trying to identify horse and carriage, and you'll see it on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. It just shifts back and forth. It can't figure out what it is, and it's trying to compare it to vehicles in its database, none of which match what's in front of it. And it's really interesting to watch this process as the AI is like, well, it's not a truck. It's not a truck sideways. It's not a truck moving. It's not a pickup truck. It's not a truck facing me going the wrong way. It's not a truck with there's a person there. Is it a truck with a person walking behind it? It was just completely confused by this horse and carriage. See how that could very easily lead to a problem in terms of that navigating by itself without a human there checking it. What is it? Next slide. And these are just some other examples of AI being in its infancy. These are very basic tools created years ago, but they're really good examples. So somebody thought, I'm going to sell phone cases on Amazon, and I'm just going to have trending images put on these phone cases because people want pictures of trending images. And that way these phone cases are going to fly off the rack, so to speak. And you ended up with like images that looked like this. Like for some reason, there was a trending image of toenail fungus, and nobody wants a phone with toenail fungus on it. This is the AI trying to identify criminals. Amazon's facial recognition technology. It identified all of those sitting members of Congress as convicted criminals at the time. And you can see how many people there are people of color or women. And so that's a significant issue with in terms of bias. So that's sort of the overlay of all the different issues. I'm going to dive into the ways that lawyers can use ChatGPT, but let me see. Let me look through the comments real quickly before I go into that section, and then see if there's anything I can answer now, and then we'll answer questions at the tail end that are about the ways you can use ChatGPT ethically. Julie raised a good point. California introduced CLE credits addressing technology. I didn't know California had done that. New York recently did that. They called it cyber security credits. Florida has a requirement as well, and there's one other state that also has those. So increasingly, you definitely need to, and the duty of technology competence also has been rolled out across the vast majority of, and accepted as an issue across the vast majority of jurisdictions. So, you know, you really need to be tech competent at this point, attending seminars like this and conferences like Tech Show, or, you know, if there's conferences for, you know, civil litigators, go to those, because they all, I guarantee you, they're all including generative AI, because I've been asked to speak at a bunch of them this year and going into next year. So even conferences that are not focused on tech, they're doing keynotes on these topics, because the Association of Defense Trial Attorneys asked me to speak in next April, I believe, and that they've got a whole section on technology. And a lawyer I know locally at my local bar association emailed me. I used to head the tech committee at my bar association, and he emailed me and told me, sent me he was at a conference for civil litigators, and the agenda was 75% tech. And he said that had never happened. Like, it was all focused on tech. So it's a significant issue, especially for your practice area, to really be on top of this. And it's really important. And Julie pointed out that the CLE requirements in California go into effect in 2025. But it's definitely important to stay on top of this stuff. And what I'm going to talk to you now is about the ways that lawyers can use ChatGPT. I'm focusing specifically on litigation use cases. And what's really important to understand is that I'm talking about ChatGPT or Google Bard or Bing Chat. I'm talking about the public-facing consumer tools that are not created by legal providers, that may have a switch to toggle off training. That's the problem, by the way. I'll go into that a little bit more in depth. But basically, the assumption is anything you input into these systems can be used by the systems to train them. What that means is that the way that these generative AI tools learn and get better is by training on what you put into them, in addition to the entire internet through 2021, which is that was all the data that was used to train them. The way that they work is essentially, the simplest way to explain it is, they predict the next word that's going to come every time they're writing a sentence based on the words that you gave them. The output is unbelievable. If you've ever seen this, if you need to give it a try. Even with my legal technology committee, which I'm no longer the head of it because I'd been there 3 years and I had to step down because that's the rules at our bar, but I still attend the committee. When I brought this up to them in February, even these tech savvy lawyers that are on this committee kind of poo-pooed it. They're like, oh, well, and I said, no, let me screen share and show you. And what I did was I pulled it up and I showed them ChatGPT, and I told it to draft a personal injury demand letter. And it drafts it in a second. And it's a really good basic demand letter for a personal injury case. And it'll tell you, and I told it to make it a car accident case. And it'll tell you, note the name of the intersection here, describe the car here. But it's a really good demand letter, especially for lawyers that are new, that have never created one before, and don't have someone in the office where they can just stick their head in someone's door and ask them if they have it, or don't have these resources available. It does a fantastic job at this type of output. And it's really, really useful. And so I would suggest trying Google Bard, because at this point, since they just rolled out their newest update today, in the last few days, it's actually better than ChatGPT Plus. ChatGPT Plus has been declining in its output a little bit, and I'm not sure why. Google Bard was fantastic. I tested them out and compared them today, and its output is really, really good. But when you use these tools, you can't put anything confidential in there. You can't if you can upload a public-facing pleading, a pleading that's been filed publicly, you can upload that into there. It's public. You don't want to input any confidential client information, even your client's name, because what it will do is it can take that data and it can use it as output for somebody else's question. And that's what happens with these public-facing tools, because they don't have things in place to confine that data. Legal-specific companies, what they do is they create an environment for each law firm And you can even change the permissions within the law firm. So if you want to ask about billing data within your law firm, but you're an associate and you're not supposed to know what the partner bills, for example, it can be set up so that you won't be able to get that output. But a partner can ask about billing data or tell it to create a chart or show who is billing the most or who has the most originating cases or whatever. And it'll pull this from your firm's billing data and give you complex responses and data analytics if you have access to all that information. But it's only going to do it within your firm's environment. So that data is not used to train all the other law firms that use this same software. Every firm has its own environment that's guardrailed and protected and encrypted and secured. So ideally, you're going to be using legal specific software that has generative AI built into it. But right now, that's not widely available, especially for a lot of these use cases that you'll want to use it for. So that's why you can still use ChatGPT and benefit, and it's cheaper as long as you don't input confidential information and you carefully review the output. You need to have a basis of understanding. So that's the other thing I want to emphasize. I'm going to say employment law. Most of you guys don't handle employment law, right? I would, if the vast majority of you are litigators, probably plaintiffs' attorneys. And so employment law is not in your bailiwick, if you will. If you asked it to provide you with some complex analysis for an employment matter, because someone hired you for that, I wouldn't trust the output because you don't have this foundational knowledge to look at it and say, well, this is BS. This is horrible. This is absolutely the wrong analysis, because you don't have the foundation to understand it. But if you ask it to provide a complex personal injury analysis, some sort of issue related to, I don't know, indemnification maybe or something, it will do a pretty good job. And possibly even for your jurisdiction. I tested it out because by entering 2 different legal issues in there, both criminal. I won an appeal years ago when I was interning at the public defenders right out of law school, and it was a murder case, and it was defense of a third party. So I know that really well because I wrote an appeal on it, and then I handled that case, that type of concept throughout my years practicing criminal defense. So I understood that really well, and so I asked it, a complex question related to that. As applied by New York, and its output was really good, but I knew that because I knew it really well, right? And I also asked about operation in a DWI case, because I know that really well because I've handled so many DWI cases. What's operation in New York State? And can you tell me exceptions or whatever? And the output was really good, but I knew the correct answer. So when you're doing that type of analysis and you want output that's very specific to legal issues, you need to use legal software. But there are a lot of things, now we're going to go through those with all those caveats. I think it's so important to hammer those home. But there are a lot of things you can do. It's very good at document creation and summary, right? So you can take a public-facing document, like a pleading that's been filed with the court, and ask it to summarize it. You can click a button, upload a PDF, or copy and paste the document in there, and it will summarize it. It'll do a really good job. I wouldn't rely on that summary for cross-examination, but you can ask it to tell you where it found each of these different pieces of information, the page, and you can go find it and highlight it. So it's like having an associate. When I was a young associate, I used to summarize depositions when I first started because I didn't handle civil litigation, and they wanted me to learn what it was coming out of criminal defense. And so I summarized depositions, and I learned what a deposition was. I learned about a lot of the legal issues, and it also gave the partner a summary to work with. That's what this can do for you in seconds. It's fantastic for that type of thing. Or give it a statute, upload a statute, and tell it to summarize it for you. It can do that. It can summarize cases for you. But again, you actually have to read the case. You have to actually read the statute. You have to actually read the pleading. And if you want to summarize depositions and trial transcripts, you're going to have to use legal specific. Co-counsel can do that. I think Lexis's products can as well. And there are other publics out there, products in beta that can do that in a secure environment. But Co-counsel, which is Lexis, owned by Thomson Reuters now, it's available and it can do that. But it's expensive, right? So there's upsides and there's downsides. It's expensive, all things considered. Other things that you can use it for are create documents and templates, and revise and edit documents. So again, you can ask it to copy edit a document, copy edit it, give me a list of suggested changes. And you can ask it to create templates. Like I said, a draft of a demand letter, a draft of a retainer letter, a draft of a retainer agreement. Like there's all sorts of things you can ask it to create. And it does a really good job. And you can also have it change the tone of a document, and it's good for difficult conversations. The example I like to use is I know somebody whose wife died of cancer, and I know him pretty well, and I had worked with her as well. And I was just going to send a very perfunctory email, sorry for your loss. Her memory will be with us always, because I never know what to say. I told ChatGPT the situation, how I knew this person, how I knew his wife, and asked it to draft a short, condolence letter. And it did. And it was beautiful. I edited it. I revised it. I, took some things out and made it more personal than what it had given me. And I sent it to him, and I kind of felt like an asshole because, like, who does this? But at the calling hours, he came up to me and he said, or when I was talking to him, he said, it was beautiful. I read it out loud to my kids, and I really felt like such a jerk. But my husband was like, but the good news, it wasn't bad because you made him feel at peace. You helped him. So it's great at that. It's great for difficult conversations. If you have to talk to an associate who's doing a bad job, it'll help you frame it in a way that's going to be a lot more constructive, especially if you're really irritated or a difficult client. But again, keep confidentiality issues in mind, because that's really important. There's a whole bunch of use cases, and I'm going to go through the list in a minute that are specific to your practice area. Idea generator. It's fantastic for coming up with ideas for voir dire or cross or direct exam. Cross exam, direct exam is pretty easy for cross, So public defender that I know who now works in the tech side of the PD's office, and he helps analyze all the digital evidence and help them make sense of it and obtain it and stuff. But he told me that one of his colleagues used it for voir dire to help come up with ideas on a very specific topic that related to a murder case for voir dire, and that this person used 8 out of the 10 questions in the voir dire that the ChatGPT gave it. And got a not guilty, certainly not just because of the voir dire, but we all know that picking a good juries gets you halfway there. So it's great for that. It's great for cross-examination. Again, I tested it out, like where I wanted to cross a cop on operation of a vehicle. It does a really good job with that. It's a great educator. You can say, tell me all about this statute, or tell me all about this point of law, and give me sources, and then go read the sources, to make sure that the output is correct. But it still does a very good job. Or if you have an article that you found, have it summarize it. It's great for that kind of thing, that will tell you whatever the specific point that you want. And then writing sentiment. It does a great job at changing the sentiment of a piece, or just helping you with difficult conversations. I think of it as like a personal assistant I've never used. I've never really wanted to use a person as a personal assistant throughout my career, because I hated using secretaries, because, you got to go back and forth. It takes more time than just doing it yourself. And when they annoy you, especially when you're in a rush, it's hard not to be a jerk to them, or when you're really stressed. This is a machine, and I still try to be nice to it, because I like to invite the robot lawyers. I welcome them used to welcome them on Twitter. Now I welcome them on LinkedIn weekly. I like to welcome the robots, our robot overlords, just in case they do take over. So I try to be nice to it, just in case. Also, because I don't like to feel rude. So, but it's a fantastic tool. It's like this personal assistant. I use it in my professional and personal life all the time. I ask it to come up with 10 different titles for an article that I'm writing for the ABA Journal. I use it to pair wine with a menu, or to come up with a menu based on the food that I have on hand. It's fantastic for this stuff. But so here's some use cases. Summarize a legal concept. I talked about that. If you have a new legal concept that has come up in a case that you're unfamiliar with, find the law online, copy and paste it, ask for a summary. Find a treatise somewhere, copy and paste it, or upload a PDF and ask it to tell you about it. Summarize the main things, or tell me what it means in this context. And you'll be surprised at what a good job it does. It is a fantastic tool, and it's like a really smart person that just goes off the deep end and lies sometimes. I think of it as like when my kids were 3, they're in college now. When one of them would look right at you and shove the other kid over, and you'd say, what did you just do? Why did you do that to your sister? And they'll look at you with their eyes wide open and go, do what, mommy? Like you're an idiot. They're like such good liars. And it's kind of like that, because it's so convincing, because in the appropriate context, then it'll just slap a lie in the middle of it. again, the legal products have reduced this to almost nothing. And ChatGPT and the other products do a good job as well. Summarize cases, that's another use case, but it's fantastic for this, especially when you're just in the weeds and the case is so long, or if you don't have access to legal research tools, so you don't have the head notes or something. It does a really good job of summarizing them. And also maybe you're in court and opposing counsel cites some case you've never heard of. Great, on your feet to go and skim this really quickly to get your bearings before you actually read the case, rather than feeling like you're in the middle of this complex case and you're feeling a little stressed because you got to go in there really quickly and rebut whatever they just said. Summarize transcripts, I talked about that, but you can, especially the legal specific tools, it's fantastic. Some of them, like CoCounsel, is wonderful. You can upload an entire transcript or multiple. Some of them, like a company called ClearBrief, you might want to look into. It's really more for appellate attorneys, but you can also use it preparing for cross and stuff. You can upload all of the depositions that were taken in a case, like thousands of pages. And then you can ask it to create a timeline of a specific event, or ask them, provide all the instances where someone talked about the color of the car. And it will do that. And it'll tell you exactly where it found it. And it'll show you the discrepancies. You can use it to create a timeline of your case. There's so many, just all the different ways that you use a transcript or want to use a transcript. It can do these things in a matter of minutes. Sometimes it can take up to 10 minutes, depending on the tool you're using. But that's a far cry from the 2 or 3 hours it would otherwise take you or someone else, or even more than that, to do these things. And for if you're writing an appeal, it's really good at finding all those points that you're going to need to put into your appeal. These are fantastic tools. I can't tell you enough, especially the legal specific ones. And I definitely expect probably by June of next year, almost every major company that is going to come out with some sort of GAI in it, generative AI. Another use case is ideas for direct or cross. And I talked about that, but it's fantastic. Really more for cross, I think direct, but for direct, right? Like, it's one less thing to think about if it gives you a decent list of questions to ask. And then you can just analyze it and add the other ones in or cross them off as you go. But it's a great use case for that. Really helpful. Ideas for voir dire. Again, I talked about that, but it's a really interesting way. And I used it for a sample voir dire and a sample cross. And it came up with some ideas on cross and some questions for voir dire that I wouldn't have otherwise thought of, like ways to get at this idea of when you're defending another person, it's still self-defense, even if you aren't directly at risk. Ways to ask them about situations in their lives where they've done that. Or on cross, trying to get that point across through your question, even if you don't get the answer that you want. Or on direct, like ways to get your client to talk about it if you happen to put them on the stand. So it's really helpful and comes up with ideas that you otherwise might not have thought of, even having done this for as long as many of you, I'm sure, have. Draft client intake forms. It's really useful for this aspect of your practice. Drafting intake forms for personal injury cases for different types, like automobile versus slip and fall. For simple intake forms like on your website, or like intake forms for people to do over the phone. It's very quick and it does a really good, thorough job. Or for the clients to fill out themselves. It's great for retainer agreements and all those other forms that you need in your firm. Obviously, you got to modify it, review it, make it specific to your firm and your firm's needs. And speaking of retainer agreements, some of the, like California suggested that you may need to include notice in those that you're going to be using these tools, AI tools, to your clients. I would suggest that those requirements are going to go away pretty quickly. Ethics committees have done this with all new technology. They keep requiring client consent when email came along, cloud computing, they want client consent, but eventually it becomes so commonplace that it's no longer an issue and it's assumed you're going to use it. We're going to get to that point very quickly with GAI. So this, including it in retainer agreements, may be a temporary thing, but it's not a bad idea to do. Drafting client correspondence, it's great for that. And I want to get to questions. So you can draft pleadings with it. Just be careful. That's super important. Read that super carefully and use other sources, not just this one. I would even suggest that with legal output. You want to make sure that pleadings are really important. You can't leave something out of that. And then other ways that lawyers use generative AI, like basic AI tools that were out before generative AI, and I've written about all these in my ABA column. Contract analytics, contract management, litigation analytics will be very important for you guys. There's a bunch of tools out there for that, especially if you're doing federal, but even if you're not doing federal litigation. But it helps you choose which district to actually file it in when you get based upon outcome predictions. When you get assigned a judge, what are the different procedural mechanisms that you can use to achieve your goals that the judge most likely grants versus some other way that the judge always denies it? And what are the cases the judge cites when they grant or deny these different things? And how can you kind of get around that or find a different mechanism to accomplish the same goal that they're more likely to grant? Legal research, it's already out, and some of the litigation analytics stuff with generative AI built into it, but there's already AI for all these tools, and generative AI is getting rolled in really rapidly to this stuff. So before we do this poll, let me go back. I want to look at actually, let's do the poll, and then I think we'll do the questions after that. So let's do the poll real quickly, and then I will take a look at the questions and answer the ones that have come in, because we're very close to the top of the hour. All right, let's see. Get the poll off my screen. Okay. So let's take a look. So the questions are on the next slide. I just want to say it's really important that you're here today. Kudos for being here, for being interested in this. It's going to move so quickly. It's really important to continue to attend CLEs like this, because it's changing so fast that there's going to be a lot more new information coming down the pike. So let me look at the questions real quickly, and maybe we'll go a minute or two over. Let me just see. Could you list the 10 best AI legal tools, order of preference? Well, so let me just say that I'm going to be like the bar associations and say I can't recommend any specific tools because for any number of reasons. I can tell you the ones that are already out publicly and the ones that are most interesting to me. How about, like I said, LexisNexis plus AI is already out, and they're rolling it out into a bunch of different tools, mostly drafting and legal research right now. And then Thomson Reuters also publicly rolled out their legal research generative AI tools, and also Co-Counsel is available in Lexis in some of its platforms and tools, and it's also available as a standalone. Co-Counsel is really good. Their team has been working with AI. They're the ones I mentioned before with OpenAI, the longest, not just in the legal space, but in all of technology. They've been working with it for a really long time. They're very knowledgeable. That's why, one sec. Thomson Reuters bought them for $650 million. Co-Counsel is a very good tool right now, and it's publicly available. A company called LawDroid has a tool called Copilot that is in beta. That's a good one. I also have, if you go to my ABA journal columns, I write about different categories and list, in those columns, I talk about a specific category of software, including some of these generative AI software tools. I talk about what to think about when choosing, and then I list the top players in that space right now. So those are also going to be good resources for those, depending on what you're looking for. Trial prep. I think for drafting pleadings for laws, I think Co-Counsel right now is one of the top ones, but definitely Lexis and Thomson Reuters tools are going to be the best place. ClearBrief is really interesting, especially for litigators like you guys, so I would consider looking at that. And I would also note that none of these are products that my company, that Affinipay owns or has any stake in. I'm definitely wearing my neutral hat here, which I always do when I'm speaking. And I think ChatGPT, I mean, you can use any legal ones for that, but you can also use ChatGPT Plus or Google Bard and see what it comes out with for these things. I think you'll find that it's really helpful. And a copy of the slides, I don't know if we send those out or not. I don't know if you can answer that, Robin, in the chat. I'm not sure what CASEpeer does or if that's something that you can do for them. But I definitely recommend taking a look at my legal ABA journal columns. The one that was just published, my most recent one, summarizes all my columns from the past year, which include about 6 of them with links about generative AI, different topics. So that might be the place to start. Just look for my most recent ABA journal column, and that'll give you a little, I talk about legal assistance, that's category. I talk about drafting, contract drafting, I think. I'm not sure, I'd have to go back and look. but that would be a good place to start, I think. And you can find me on LinkedIn if you have any questions, or else you can email me as well, and I'm happy to answer them. And I hope this was helpful. A lot of information, but I wanted to make sure to cover all this, given where you guys were coming from as litigators. So thanks so much for listening. And hopefully I will see you online sometime soon, or maybe even in person. Have a great day.